Hey everyone, welcome to Tracer Burnout. I'm Roger.
And I'm Dan.
And it is good to be back in studio again. We've been recording a lot of these episodes pretty close back to back.
Yes, we have.
So.
Yeah, and the last one was a doozy.
It was a long one.
It was a long one. Yes, long. Long and troublesome. But that's okay because I had my Ariel resupply coffee to get me through it.
Nicely done,
yes.
Sir. Nicely done.
Yes. Not just my favorite Spectre, but I also had some Freedom Kitty left from the last shipment. Delicious.
I forget how much you love flavored coffee.
I don't know what it is, man. The Breakfast Kitty one is really good with breakfast, obviously. But then the Freedom Kitty is just really good.
Well, we love our friends over at Ariel Resupply Coffee,
Yep.
another good veteran-owned company.
Yep.
So head over there, use Tracer Burnout as a coupon code. You get 10% off. You help them, you help us. We appreciate it. So stay caffeinated out there. Okay.
Now you got a mailbag for us.
We do have a
don't you?
mailbag. So
Sure. Who's it from?
It's from Mark. It's from Mark.
Okay.
We'll say Mark S.
Okay.
His question is, what was our favorite duty station? So I'm going to presume this is during our service and not as Army brats. So you go first.
My favorite duty station, just for pure overall enjoyment, would have certainly been when I was in Germany, when I was in Baumholder, which I was born there, and then I got to return as a soldier. But for the guys that I was with, for the soldiers that I had, it was great. It was great. Being in Europe is amazing, especially if you love travel and history and food like I do. Being in the Army in Europe,
mixed bag.
Yeah. And the guys who were there with me, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But as far as like keeping it strictly military, training, and just the grind and the rewarding experiences, it would have to be Fort Drum. I never trained anywhere else throughout the rest of my career as I did when I was at Fort Drum, and that wasn't something I appreciated at the time. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's usually how that works, right?
Yeah. When you're hip deep in snow, trying to pull an Accio full of equipment that is not for you. Yeah.
But think of the character building that you went through during
I went through a lot of
so much
frozen character building.
So much frozen character, yes.
What about you?
So I was an Asia guy, so a lot of really amazing TDYs. I couldn't call them duty stations, but I got to do a lot of really amazing travel during my time. But favorite duty station, I mean, it's all got to come back to the center of the universe, Fort Bragg. Best training I ever did, some best units I would say I was ever a part of, no question. I would give an honorable mention to, I got to do 1 year at Fort Lewis, JBLM. I did my company command out there, and that is amazing country out there. So our friends in Washington, we love you, even though I-5 is Satan's corridor. Washington was amazing. So I could easily retire there if my wife were going to allow me to do that. The climate there is amazing. So Washington, but to answer more directly, it's got to be the center of the universe, Fort Bragg.
Typical airborne elitism.
Well,
but that's okay.
I mean, it's not necessarily elitism. Oh, okay, yeah, it is. Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Typical.
All right, give us a podcast update.
Okay, so in the theme of travel and places that we've been, Tracer Burnout, the international journey continues. So, over the last week or so, we have picked up Iceland and Australia. So, I hope that the historian in me, the history lover, hopes that the spirit of Snorri Sturluson is looking down kindly on us in whatever hereafter he may have found. So,
Till Valhalla.
I think he was Christian. I'm pretty sure he was. That was pretty late.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then Australia, where I have never been, and to be honest, I don't know if I want to go because allegedly everything there is trying to kill you,
including the government now.
But I did work with some amazing Australian
the Aussie troops were awesome. Oh
yeah,
man,
they were great. I actually have a few gifts from them. Maybe I should put up in studio.
As do I. For another time in podcast, we should tell war stories about serving with foreign militaries, because the Aussies were.
Yeah. But
they were real blokes.
Our international journey does not end there. This morning, rather, at the time of this recording, we have just released Josh Martin's episode.
Yes.
And now we have listeners in Sweden.
So the Scandinavians are holding it down for us.
Yes.
Okay.
The Scandinavians are coming up strong. So, yeah. Awesome.
To keep in our theme of, Muppets being, partial mascots of the show, now all I can think of is, Waldorf and Statler and Waldorf are you, and now we've got the Swedish
the Swedish chef.
So we've now offended our Swedish fan, and yes, that's fantastic. Good job.
we love all you guys.
We do
love
indeed,
all you guys, and keep spreading the word and sharing these amazing stories of these veterans that we have on. And would you like to do the introduction?
I would be happy to. So coming up next, we have Navy veteran Miss Theresa Carpenter coming up. Stay tuned.
Theresa, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. This is awesome.
I'm really happy to be here. I can't believe this worked out.
For the audience that does not know, when we first got this idea, we reached out to several different podcasts, and you were the first one to get back to us and be so encouraging and supportive and giving us different insights and everything that you had learned along the way from your own podcast, which we'll get into later. But here on camera, on the recording, thank you.
It was very kind of you to schedule your entire PCS around us.
Yes.
You're right. Nothing else came before coming here.
That's right.
That's true. That's true too.
Well, no, it was wonderful to be able to help both of you in this journey. I know that when I started, I had people like Jose Velasquez. He just got an award, actually. He's a dear friend, and he's a sergeant major in the Army who retired as a public affairs officer, or a public affairs specialist. And him and Matt Denny, who's a Marine, combat correspondent, both of them were essential in helping me start. They were like, you should get StreamYard, you should use this type of setup. Everything. I was just going back and forth with them like you guys did with me. So I knew that was so helpful for me, and that when I had the opportunity to pay it forward, I was going to do so.
It's awesome, and we do appreciate it, as well as, like Roger said, you deviating your PCS plans to join us here in person, because that is the way we like to.
How do we know she didn't
do things?
How do we know she didn't volunteer to PCS just to come here and do this?
We don't know that for sure.
Whole reason I'm in Mississippi is so that I can make a chance to come here to Fayetteville.
A couple of hours here at Tracer Burnout Studio.
No, it's a pleasure, and I was just very fortunate that the timing worked out, that when we did our show, you guys asked me to come on your show, and I happened to be doing a drive down south, so I'm really happy that we had this chance to do this.
Ask and ye shall receive.
All right, so let's get into this, but forewarning for everybody is you are the first person that we've talked to that is still actively in service for just a little bit longer.
Yes. But,
you are on your way out, but you are still actively in service. So your story is going to be rather incomplete.
Yeah.
Because you still have that last
tour.
That last little bit.
A 3-hour tour.
But we will start in the same way. Does your family have a history of service?
They do. Well, oh God, I can't believe I almost said they do not, because I come from Columbus, Ohio, and it's a town in the Midwest. Central Ohio is the capital, and there's not a whole lot of people who have done military service where I'm from. However, my father was drafted in Vietnam, not to go to Vietnam, but during that era. And instead of going into Vietnam and into country, he actually worked for Armed Forces Radio and Television in Panama. So he was a broadcaster. He had a radio show. I got to interview him as my first guest on my podcast.
Nice.
And that was really memorable. And he was telling me about all the different shows he had on there. And he was supposed to be a architect, and learned that he was a better communicator than an architect, and so he went into communications instead, and he ended up becoming a broadcaster for the Army. Did his I think 3 years, his draft time, and then got out and was a DJ. And then after that, he decided to be a work for himself as a voiceover artist.
Oh, very
and so
cool.
when I grew up with him, that's all he did. So he was home a lot because he was just work for different ad agencies when they needed him.
So during his time in Panama, did he ever do the Adrian Cronauer and, Good Morning Panama?
I don't think he had that kind of a show, but I do believe he had like a variety show.
You could have lied. He said
I
yes.
know. I don't think so. But if you listen to my father's voice, my father's name is Charlie Pickard, and he still has his website online. So you can Google Charlie Pickard and hear some of his early clips from his broadcasting days. And he's got a voice for radio. He has that way of just enunciating certain things, and he does the intro to my show. And it was so fun to watch him read. I wrote a little script for him, and he read it in front of me, and I was just like, "Oh, he's still got it."
That's really cool. So you sort of have that in your genes.
I do. When I was growing up, I would go with my father to a lot of these ad agencies, and I would just ride in the car. And I hate to say it, maybe my favorite part of it was we'd get to go to McDonald's, and then I would sit in the lobby with the receptionists, and there was like one place I went where they had a bunch of golden retrievers. It was like the photo studio that was also a golden retriever breeder, so she'd have all our dogs there. So I always loved going there
That's
to see the
very central
dogs.
Ohio, by the way. That's very much so.
Yeah. So it was kind of a whole thing where, I was very exposed to that, to recording studios. I got to see behind the scenes how they would mix his voice and how they would ask him to read the same line over and over and over again just to get it just right. And it was an interesting process, but I didn't think that I was going to be a podcaster. Like, this was not in my path. I mean, public affairs, okay, and then now, all right. But early on in my career, no, I didn't think this was what it was.
So how did you wind up in the Navy?
So I joined the Navy when I was 19, and prior to that, I'll back up. I moved out of my parents' house when I was the summer before my senior year. I was having a lot of disagreements with my mother. Her and I were butting heads. We had been butting heads for years, but it was getting to a point where I think I was going to stand up to her, and it was going to get to a place where it was going to get physical. And we both agreed that before it would get to that place, it would be best for me to not live at home anymore. But what to do with me? I'm still a senior in high school. I was going to Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, which I hated. I was very rebellious. I wanted to go to the public school. So the decision was made for me to transfer to the public school, move out, and move into a home that was rented by two sisters whose parents owned the home while they went to college, and they had extra rooms. So that was my first place on my own. And the agreement was I paid the utilities, my parents paid the rent. So they didn't completely cut me off, but it was understood that I wasn't going to live with my mom and dad anymore. And so my senior year, I went to East High School, which due to busing in Columbus, they had this thing where certain neighborhoods, they wanted to make it more racially diverse, or certain schools rather. And so they would bus the kids from my neighborhood down to East High School in this other neighborhood. So I didn't know anybody there. It wasn't really a great experience for me. I was kind of barely there, but I was also responsible enough to know that I wanted a diploma. So that's why when they took away the standards for them to not have the high school diploma for the Navy to enlist, it was very emotional for me, because that was such a tumultuous time in my childhood where I barely got a diploma, but I did, because I knew that if I just didn't have that one small price of admission, like, my whole future would be impacted. So got my diploma, and then I partied constantly, and I was working different jobs. I was just hanging out with whoever. I didn't have a lot of boundaries, and I did that for about 1 to 2 years. And I happened to live with somebody who joined the Marine Corps, and he said, this is something you should do. The reserves he was in, but maybe not the Marines. Maybe you should look at Air Force or Navy or some of these other branches. And I was just kind of like, well, I know that I'm going to run out of money. I'm going to run out of friends. All my friends were going off to college, and they were starting their lives, and they were getting boyfriends and all these other things. And I was not doing those things because I couldn't hold down a relationship. I could barely hold down a job. I would bounce from job to job to job because I was unhappy. And I ended up becoming friends with a guy who became sort of a confidant and a mentor to me in some ways. And he was the one that really talked me into it. He's like, this would be good for you to go into the military. And all my friends thought I was crazy. They were like, you, party girl, rebellious, the one who's always getting everybody in trouble, you're going to join the Navy. And I just remember thinking, well, what other options do I have? I'm not going to keep working low wage, dead end jobs that I'm not happy with, and I'm going to keep racking up debt. I had a small student loan debt at that time, and so that's how I joined. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it was, I love to tell you, like, oh, it was this great, it's like, oh my gosh, I want to serve my nation and all those things, and I'm really patriotic. It really wasn't that story. It was more, I just needed a way to support myself and pay my bills, and I didn't want to rely on my mom and dad. And so I knew, like, I've got to know how to be a wage earner. How am I going to make a good wage? How am I going to learn what I want to do? And I didn't even think about broadcasting or public affairs or any of those kinds of things, because I was just so stuck in my head and in my own trauma that I wasn't in a place where I could really understand what I was good at.
I think that probably more people than not find themselves in the military under somewhat similar circumstances. They're looking for a way out of that whatever situation they're in, or they're looking for a better job or employment, or they're tired of whatever situation they're in. I think that is far more common than people actually having like a genuine calling to service.
Right.
I mean, I think a lot of people who have never served and maybe elitists could look at that and think to themselves like, oh, these poor people, they don't even know any different. But I mean, thank God for the Army. I don't know what I would have done with my life without it. I mean, geez. So
yeah. I mean, it was the first time that I was around mentors, and I was around people that I felt like this is who I want to be like one day. And I never had that really growing up. I didn't have mentors. I wasn't athletic. I was in Flag Corps for maybe a year and a half. I think I tried to join the second year, and then I was too busy partying. But actually, Flag Corps was the first thing that I did that I felt really proud of, because I practiced nonstop to do that, and it was because I wanted to keep up with my friends. My friends were all doing it, and so I felt like, okay, this is something I should do. But that was probably my only real accomplishment as a child, because I wasn't good in school. I would never pay attention. I thought I was above it. I thought I was entitled, and I just wouldn't focus. And so the military really gave me like that sense of purpose and direction. And when I got there, I was like, I'm not going to let this. I'm not going to go back home. I am going to make this thing work. And it stirred something in me.
So you made it easy for the recruiter. You went to them, right?
I did. And at first, they didn't really know where to put me. I do remember that. Like, they didn't really know, like, which direction to go. And then I remember, I'll never forget this, I had a heart-to-heart with the chief about kind of where my life was going and how unhappy I was, and just kind of got emotional about it. And he's like, we're gonna take care of you. We got you. And I remember, like, what does that mean? What am I? And they sent me air crew, which was a really great opportunity. They didn't just make me an aviation electrician's mate, which is a ground pounder maintainer. They added on air crew, which is an awesome program that allows you to fly in the airplane. You collect extra pay. I mean, you have to get through a school in Pensacola that's difficult, but that was tacked on to my enlistment contract. So they did really take care of me. But I don't think that was going to happen at first, because I think I scored like a 51 on the ASVAB or something, because I didn't have any school skills, because I never paid attention, and I wasn't focused.
But that wasn't apathy. That you were legitimately trying.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like, I was legitimately trying, but I didn't have the skills to do those things, because I had spent years in high school and in grade school zoning out. Like, I wouldn't take in anything that they were trying to teach me, because either, like I said, I was always distracted trying to fit in, and I had really low self-esteem. So that was really, I was consumed with myself. And instead of trying to pay attention to school and be a part of teams and do the things that I learned how to do while I was in the military.
Okay, for context, what year was this that you did your initial enlistment?
96.
96, okay. So you went off to basic training in 96. Tell us about, what was the job? Air crewman,
aviation electrician's mates.
Aviation electrician. Okay, so what does that entail?
So there's a nickname in the Navy field, and they call it AE, but they call it aviation everything, because anything that has a wire attached to it, they just point to the AEs, and they're like, "You figure it out." Yeah. So it was pretty vast. I mean, anything from the wiring that goes onto the engine to the wiring on the tailhook, the wiring on the launch gear, any type of like a vertical stabilizer box, or I'm trying to remember from my S3 days, there was this thing called the ANCU, Ancillary Navigation Control Unit.
That is such a government acronym if I ever heard one. Yes.
Oh yeah, there's FCU, Flight Control Unit. So everything had an acronym to it, but any electrical box that made the airplane fly, we were in charge of, in terms of either we would change the box out or the wiring that went to that box. So it was a very challenging role for me. I'd never read a schematic before I joined the Navy. I'd never used a multimeter. I didn't know anything about the difference between alternating current or direct current. I didn't understand resistance. I didn't know any of these theories. So it was definitely a big learning curve for me. But gradually over time, I got better at it. And I went from P3s in Iceland. That was my first duty station. Then I had my nervous breakdown. That's another story. And almost got kicked out of the Navy for that. And then I fought a medical board to stay in the military. Spent a year in Great Lakes, Illinois, fighting my board. And then I got S3s. And then that's where I ended up before my officer program.
So tell us about your basic and then your advanced training. I forget what you call the regimental training?
Oh, for the Air Force?
No, Shay. We had a logistics specialist Navy before. She explained what the name of the school was.
A school, C school, usually what they call them. I went through air crew school. Well, I went through air crew school first, and then when I was in air crew school, that's when they decided what aviation rate I would be.
Gotcha.
And so I wanted at first to be an aviation ordnanceman, because I was like, "Oh, bombs! That's gonna be so cool." And then I was later. People had convinced me that AE would be better for a job in the outside world. So I was like, okay, well, that can be something I could do once I'm out of the Navy. So, okay. And again, I'm still kind of like, I don't know what my aptitude is. I don't know that I'm probably a better storyteller than a tinkerer person. But at that point in my life, I just didn't have that kind of insight into myself. And so I ended up going aircrew, then going AE, to my AE school, and then I was in in-flight observer school for P3s. Went to Iceland, spent a year and a half in Iceland, and then left Iceland, went to Great Lakes, fought the board, and then went to S3s.
With the difficulty that you had in school, for whether it was zoning out or just not absorbing the information and everything, did those struggles, I guess, continue in your initial trainings?
Oh yeah, childhood trauma just what happens when this is, and I can probably say anyone who's had trauma out there, when you've had childhood trauma that's left unaddressed, all that happens is it's just like a scab that keeps getting torn off every time a new situation happens, and because you've never really dealt with that original scar. And so I would have challenges even in school. I was bullied, like in high school and in grade school. I'd be bullied in A school. I mean, the same things would happen to me because I hadn't learned how to stand up to myself. I hadn't learned how to figure out how to maneuver around these people, or basically tell them off or get somebody else involved. I didn't have any of these tools to do that. So those same things would happen. I would just get re-traumatized at these newer places. But in all of that, I was always such a fighter. I would just think to myself, well, this is what I need to do. I need to get through this. I need to figure out a way to if I got to stay all night and learn schematics and just take the test over and over and over and over again and beat this information into my head, I'm going to do it, because I knew I couldn't go home. Were
there instructors that saw the way you were struggling to absorb the information?
Yes.
And did they assist?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there were. I think there was a lot of pressure. And this is probably not going to be politically correct to say, but there was a lot of pressure for women to get through these programs.
I could say that.
They wanted that.
Yeah.
And so they saw that I was trying, and they saw that I was bringing my best to the table. And so I was always able to find people that were willing to work with me. But I always had to be worked with. And that was frustrating to me because I wanted to be like everybody else that didn't struggle. But again, I had all this previous trauma from childhood that was getting in the way of things that really that wouldn't bother other people, but that would bother me. Mm-hmm. And so it was definitely a challenge. But I got through it. I mean, I passed my air crew school. The helodunker was the hardest part. I don't know if you guys know what the helodunker is.
Nope.
Oh, it's this capsule that goes underwater and then goes upside down, and it simulates a helicopter crash. And
that actually makes sense in the name.
Yeah.
Thinking about it now.
Helodunker. Yeah. Yep. Dunk in the water, upside down. And you have to do, I think it's 4 rides, and 2 of those rides are blindfolded. And one of them you can do, so you can go out the door that's right next to you. So all you got to do is hold on to that window and then try to think to yourself, okay, as it's upside down, I just need to push myself out. But the main cabin door is the hardest one. And that's where you actually have to go out a different door, and you have to feel your way out in a capsule, upside down, underwater, not even being able to see. It was terrifying.
That sounds terrifying.
It was horrible. Some
Yes.
people love it, though. They think it's such a fun ride. It was not a fun ride for me. But I got through it. And
She called it a ride.
no.
Like it's Splash
Oh
Mountain.
boy, that sounds horrible. Oh.
But there's people that loved it and thought it was a challenge. And I mean, it was a challenge, though. And then that was the thing. That's every time these things would happen and I would get through something, it would build my confidence. And I'd be like, oh, yeah, I can do it. I got this, you know?
Yeah.
So there was also this, even though it was really hard and I was struggling, I was also like building my self-esteem because I was realizing like I could get through these things.
It was laying those building blocks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, I'm going to put Dan on the spot. I know you have questions about Iceland.
I was just about to ask the same thing.
All right.
Tell us about Iceland.
Okay, so
Okay, well, let me be more specific. First, tell us about the Navy in Iceland.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And then just tell us about Iceland.
Okay. So NAS Keflavik, it is no longer, Naval Air Station Keflavik is no longer a military station, but it was used to, a lot of P3 squadrons would go there, do missions there. It was also there had a base P3. So the base P3 was called the Valkyria, and it was at the Operational Maintenance Division. It was this one squadron with one plane, and that was my first duty station, was to go there as an in-flight observer, AE air crewman, and fix the airplane, work in a shop. I got to that shop, and I'm in my, what am I now? I'm 19, 20 years old. And I made a lot of very, very poor decisions. I got drunk a lot. I had no boundaries with my coworkers, so I think you guys know where that's going. And it turned into a very, very bad situation for me because I didn't feel like these people would respect me, obviously. And that was my first taste of, you can't just go around and sleep with whoever you want and then expect for people to respect you and work with you as a professional. That is not how life works. And I really didn't have any concept of this because in A school,
That was the sound panel that just hit the floor?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
But in A school, you could just do that and it didn't matter because you were in your group of friends. It was like being back in high school. You could hang out with your friends. You could get your, go to school. I mean, you had your little clique. I always had a ton of friends when I was in A school. That was one thing I may have been very insecure growing up, but I always seemed to find friends, girlfriends, and guys who were friends too. But I realized that was the first taste of like, oh shit, this is the real world. This is the professional world where you don't do that kind of.
Yeah, sure.
So I ended up having, I don't think I've ever told this whole story, but my supervisor was an E5 and I was an E3 at the time. And we ended up getting into a relationship. And he was married, was not having a good relationship with his wife at the time. And his wife ended up accusing him of child abuse. And I had no idea about any of this, but I got pulled into all this. And at the time, I had already slept with a couple of other coworkers, so they probably already, and I was horrified. I was embarrassed. I was mortified that this was all happening. And I was so stressed out about it. I ended up not sleeping for a couple weeks, off and on, and became psychotic. I still to this day don't understand it. I don't really know how something like this happens, but I know it's true, and I know people can do it. So when people tell me that they're hearing voices, like for example my brother right now, I treat that person with empathy and with kindness, because I know that when you're in a place where you feel completely alone and isolated, your mind can screw with you in some really crazy ways.
Sure.
And so that was enough. They tried to send me back to Columbus, Ohio, because they thought that maybe if I was around my family that I would stop saying and doing the things I was doing. And it didn't help, because in my mind, I was thinking all these things were real, the things that I supposedly could do, which of course I can't. And it ended up resulting in me going back to Great Lakes, Illinois, where they were going to process me out of the Navy. And
so that was administrative, and there was okay.
It was going to be a med board. It was a med board for psychotic disorder not otherwise specified, and alcohol dependence. And I realized, oh shit, they're going to kick me out. And then I thought about I had all these qualifications. I got through all these schools. I can't throw all this away. And so I just got so determined and went on this mission to stay in the Navy. I wrote congressmen. I just fought my board. I found an outpatient psychiatrist who felt like I deserved a second chance. And then I learned the whole med board system and had one doctor say I was fit, one who said I was unfit, and they didn't know what to do. So
and this is all at Great Lakes?
All at Great Lakes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so they had to write a second board because they had two recommendations that were conflicting each other. The second board wrote me to be kicked out, and I didn't fight it. I said, okay, fine. I started applying for schools at Ohio State University. I figured I'd go home and stay with my parents for a very short period of time and then try to figure out what was going on. And then towards the end of that year, in 1998, I got a letter back saying that they were going to keep me in. To this day, I still don't know how or why.
Do you think a string got pulled somewhere?
It's possible.
Not transparent to you, of course, but somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I don't know. I wrote my congressman, and back then you wrote letters, and I remember
writing letters.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And
how romantic.
Yeah. And they wrote me back and said they were looking into my case, but I never heard anything more after that. And then it was a shock to me that I got to stay in, and from there I couldn't stay aircrew. They said that I could not be in a flying billet anymore. And so I went ground pounder, ground billet, AE. And I went to S3s. And then I spent 4 years on aircraft carriers. And that's where I got picked up for my officer program.
What is it? What are the S3s?
S3B Viking. It is a anti-submarine warfare aircraft. And it was the gas station in the air for all the other aircraft on the carrier. So during operations in Iraq in 2002, 2003, for an example, it was the primary platform that all the other aircraft received fuel.
Refueling?
Refueling. Air
So
flight.
dropping depth charges and refueling?
Yes.
That's a mixed bag.
I would like to read into the record that the Navy has a very odd understanding of ground pounding when people are on aircraft carriers.
I would agree. Us Navy people, I don't think we really have the full comprehension of what a ground pounder really is compared to you guys in the Army. But yeah.
That is very cool. And we've had a refuel specialist Air Force on
Really?
here before, so very
Couple of
we
episodes ago.
learned a lot about that. Very, very interesting.
Well, it's a fascinating operation to think that an aircraft can do that in flight. And I was what we call backseat qualified while I was there because they knew I was aircrew. So I went an extra step and got backseat qualified, which made me have to go back and see a psychiatrist again and all that. But I was like, oh, well, this is a great opportunity. I should do it. And it was really neat because I got to see it actually, like how the probe comes out and then this net goes and hooks up to it. It was really cool to watch.
She said that, this is Alicia, Miss Judd. She said that her husband would describe it as laying on her belly and passing gas.
I see. It's amazing that aircraft can do that. So that was a really positive experience. I was there from 99 to 2003.
So during that period is when 9/11 happened. So let's talk about that.
Yes. So when 9/11 happened, I was working night check living in Chula Vista, California. And my father called me and told me to turn on the TV. And I turn on the TV and I see the towers. And it didn't even hit me that this was real. I don't know about you guys, but is that how you felt too when this happened?
Certainly the first one felt.
I was in the field.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was in the middle of a training exercise. Yeah. So we all got summoned back to the assembly area, and we were told.
Yeah. For me, the first one for me was very surreal. The second one was, oh no, we're at war. Yeah, I don't know what's going on, but we're at war.
Yeah.
So you were in California, so this would have been at 6 in the morning for you?
First thing. Yeah.
It was around 6 in the morning. He called me before that, and because I was working nights. I remember I was asleep when he called me about it, and I didn't believe it, and I remember just thinking it wasn't real. And then when it really became real was when I had to go onto base that night for work at NAS North Island. And the gate, and this is back when the Coronado Bridge, you had to pay to get in. And then you go all the way to the right to get onto the base. And I remember it was backed up all the way to right as you get off the gate.
Yep.
And cars were just gridlocked. Because
that's every military base was like that.
Yeah, I remember we all got out of our cars and just sat on the side of the road and just waited until we could get in. And then our pilots that weekend were just flying nonstop, patrol flights. And then all of the maintainers, we all had to come in and work around the clock. I want to say we were working till about midnight. Yeah, we were working a regular shift, and then we were all staying. Then our night check was staying till about midnight. Yeah, it was crazy. And then. And everything changed. Because our squadron was constantly out after that. I did 2 deployments with them, and and then of course I did the war in Iraq from 2002 to 2003 at that same squadron, and it was a really crazy time to be in the military, because on the one hand we were very patriotic, and I felt like we were more united as a nation. But then on the other hand, it was just sort of chaotic, because things that wouldn't be up normally. We would just we would say, no, this would be down. We would never fly the airplane like this. Well, no, this time we will fly the airplane with half these systems running, because we have to make the mission happen. Yeah.
Were you at sea when Iraq kicked off?
Yes. Okay. So I was in VS-35. I was on the USS Abraham Lincoln. We actually had the record for the longest running deployment until just recently. We went in there to, I think it was just going to be a standard Western Pacific deployment, and then Iraq kicked off and we were extended. We were turned around. Went to Australia to get the non-skid put down on the flight deck, because by then the non-skid had worn off, and we went back into Iraq, and we were there until May of 2003. And so when the president landed on an aircraft carrier and he said mission accomplished, that was President Bush. He was actually landing on USS Abraham Lincoln, and he flew in an aircraft. The aircraft was an S-3B Viking, and it was aircraft 700, which is now in the Pensacola Museum. Since it was in such a historical moment.
For several reasons.
Yes. So, yeah.
So,
I don't mean to laugh.
This is I guess Navy trivia. I guess would be trivia. The aircraft carriers all have nicknames, right? Mm-hmm. The Lincoln is the shall not perish. Is that right?
Yes.
Bam.
Yeah, you got it.
Bam.
That was good. It's sad. I've been on Nimitz too, and now I'm sure one of your listeners will correct us, but I don't even remember what Nimitz was. So that's good that you know that as an Army guy.
The Teddy Roosevelt is the big stick.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because of
that one makes sense.
Yeah, because
Makes sense.
Not Ike, but yeah, Teddy Roosevelt. But no.
And that's all I know.
Well, you know more than me.
He's out of Schlitz,
I'm not, and I'm in the Navy. I should know these things, but yeah.
I have a penchant for the unimportant things to stick in my brain.
No, I mean, I think those are good trivia questions. You never know when you might have an opportunity to go on Jeopardy, and somebody might want to know those kinds of things.
I would love to see you on Jeopardy.
The categories would have to be very specific. And I mean, no, it's not. I mean, Trebek, rest in peace. I would have done it, even though he's Canadian. I would have done it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dan would put on his drill sergeant hat and start doing knife hands, and people.
I probably would, and then I would argue about why my answer was correct.
That show was. There's actually, I forget what was the name of the guy on Jeopardy that was on there for forever.
The LDS gentleman.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
What was his name?
Well, you mean as a
Yeah, like,
as a contestant.
As a contestant, that contestant
I don't
guy.
remember his name.
Ken Jennings.
Ken Jennings,
Yeah.
yes.
That's it. Yeah.
Yes, I remember the whole Ken Jennings era, and just how he just dominated for weeks.
Yeah, they actually had to cut him off. Like they were like, all right, this is your last appearance, because he was just rolling.
No, seriously, this time.
Yeah. And then they brought him back for like the Tournament of Champions and stuff like that. But yeah.
I think it's amazing that people have that kind of knowledge. My father is like that. He just has all this, I would say, random knowledge, but it's things that people are interested in. It's facts that they retain, and I think it's amazing and insightful when people tell me things like that, things about stuff that they've studied.
That's me, a font of useless information. Unless I'm on Jeopardy.
And knife hands.
But okay, so life on an aircraft carrier. You were the first real surface fleet Navy person that we've talked to, because we've talked to a logistics specialist
and a corpsman.
And a Navy corpsman who, of course, spent his time with the Marines in Vietnam. So, tell us a little bit about life on a ship, on a floating city.
Well,
really.
and I've also been on an amphib. I was on USS Boxer, and I've been on a destroyer. I was on USS Russell. So, and the unique part about my experience is that I was an Airedale in a squadron, part of the carrier air wing. I was as a maintainer when I was enlisted, and then I went back as an officer many years later, and I was part of ship's company as a public affairs officer, and as a department head. So I've seen really different sides.
Very cool.
Of the aircraft carrier life.
Yeah.
So and they're just night and day. Like, as an air wing squadron person, you're almost like a visitor to the ship. Like, the ship's company is about 3,200 people, and your air wing gets you up to about 5,000. And the air wing and the ship's company are supposed to, of course, get along and be one big happy team.
I'm not that naive.
But they're not. I mean, everything from, like, general quarters, right? So all the ship's company has to do general quarters. And, general quarters, man, your battle stations, you got to get all your gear and everything. Well, the air wing, I wouldn't say they think they're above it, but they're up there fixing airplanes all day. And so they're just not a part of a lot of those.
So they do think they're above it.
I see what you did there.
Well,
yes.
well, they're also, I mean, in the Airedale's mind, they're like, well, you know what, I'm doing 12 on, 12 off shifts. I mean, they're doing a completely different, and they're getting dirty and nasty working up in the flight deck all day. So they just have a different life than ship's company. But generally speaking, I think we all do get along. One good thing is that if you want to get your EAWS pin, Enlisted Aviation Warfare Specialist, or you want to get your Enlisted Surface Warfare Specialist pin, these are those little pins that people put on their chest, and
they're not little; they're like that long.
Well, they're maybe
Well,
maybe
the
2.5
inches. The SWOs are
the gold SWO pin, but these are the silver pins,
Okay.
and they're a really good opportunity for ship's company to get to know the Airedales, and the Airedales to get to know the ship's company, because you've got to go through all their spaces and learn and that was really insightful for me, because I got my ESWS pin while I was on Lincoln, and so I think that's good. But in terms of the life, it's just a different life, because the Airedale and the carrier air wing and the air people kind of stick together, and they're their own mini team of teams. And then you've got ship's company, and even among ship's company, there's many different divisions. I mean, just the air division, I think, is like 500 people. And they're the people that, of course, work
on one carrier?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're huge.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So, and they're the people that are doing all the things like the chalks and the chains, and they're moving, doing all the
guys you see out there waving
Yes.
the lights and
Yes,
stuff around
yes,
with
the
the
yellow
ginormous.
Doing the
Yes.
dances.
Yeah. Looking sexy, but
Hey,
doing a lot more than
whatever
that.
it takes.
Yeah. But so it really is a floating city. I mean, it is incredible. I just did a podcast with Captain Chowda. God, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he's the commanding officer of Ike, and who just came back from the Red Sea. And it is amazing to hear him talk about all the different things you have to keep in mind as a commanding officer of an aircraft carrier, and then how they work with the different warfare commanders on the ship. Because, of course, it's not just the Nimitz, or it's not just the aircraft carrier. You've got the cruisers, the one cruiser, and then you have several destroyers, and you might have a frigate. So you have this whole entire carrier strike group that comes with that. So I would say that it's a crazy life. It's a fulfilling life in many ways. I mean, I am who I am because of my time on these ships, and every ship is so different. A destroyer, it's like a tiny little town, right? Your destroyer is like your small town. Your amphib is Marines and Navy, so you get that like joint integration, which is really cool. And then an aircraft carrier is just like, it's like this big city. I mean, it's like big city life.
It's Darth Vader's ship.
Yeah. So it's a different
rest in peace.
experience.
Okay. How was the food while at sea?
It depends. So you have two lines in the galley. So as an enlisted person, you can go through the speed line, which is where you get your hamburgers, hot dogs, cheeseburgers, fries, and there's not much of a line. And then you have all your hot food. I would say the food is okay. It's mass produced. So it's not, it's even, I mean, I've even been on cruise ships, and cruise ships are kind of the same way in the buffet. I mean, I hate to say it. Like, it's like you go to the buffet or you go to specialty dining. So I would say specialty dining is more like the wardroom or the flag mess. But then the chow hall is kind of like the buffet of a cruise ship, but maybe not as good. So I'm a cruiser now too, so I have these.
She just got back from a cruise.
I did. I remember.
Yeah. I was on the Queen Mary, and then I've also been on Virgin. So yeah, I do a lot of cruises. So now I can see kind of the differences in my head, but it all depends on anything that you produce in mass isn't going to be all that great. It's going to be okay. The smaller times, if you have a more banquet style, you're just going to have better food because there's just less people to serve.
Yeah.
And a lot of people will say, well, the food in the wardroom is so much better. And I always tell people, I say, no, it's just because it's not as mass produced, because they can make smaller portions. But yeah, there is something to be said that you may get more as a galley worker in the wardroom if the food isn't very good versus if you're down in the galley. But they have temperature standards, they have food standards that they still have to follow. So it's all the same food at the end of the day.
And at the end of the day, it's just a nutrient delivery system.
Enjoy your nutrient paste.
Yeah,
yes.
The Soylent Green.
It is made out of people. Do y'all ever eat MREs while you're on the float? I mean, I would think that would be a very inefficient use of space.
No.
But
it would really be good, and I'll have to connect you guys to a good supply corps officer. In fact, I have somebody in mind, because I would love for you guys to really get into the details about how food is produced on
I don't know. You're scaring me now.
Because it's an undertaking, and I want to say too, like, I mean, there's USDA regulations and laws that they have to follow. Menus are always pre-planned in advance, like they are.
Yep.
And I want to say that they're prescribed. Like, it isn't like you can just be an MS and say, oh, I have this great, or I'm not a mess special, like a cook, and say, oh, I want to make this meal. From what I can recall, and this is just my limited knowledge from what I remember, is that no, it's a certain menu. Yeah,
all the menus are planned out in advance so that the space is being optimized for this many ingredients for this dish, this many ingredients for this dish, because if I remember right, the galley has a limited space and they have to maximize it.
I mean, short answer is yes.
So
that would be terrible. And then how long are these rotations at sea?
So it depends on the one. I feel like I'm saying it depends. It depends. It depends.
Well, I mean,
That makes
everything's
sense.
mission dependent, right? So,
There's surge deployments, which we had to do, like if North Korea were doing something that is very scary to the world and we need to go respond, we might go and surge for 2 months. And I did that on my destroyer a couple times. But generally speaking, 6 months is what we all know. We all know to be 6 months. But it can vary. It can be
that's a lot of Soylent Green.
I mean, it's a grind, and I mean, every day you're out there, it definitely feels like Groundhog Day,
Yeah.
and it feels like you're doing the same thing, and you have to find ways to make good use of the time. I mean, working on your qualifications. Some people take college classes on the ship. They actually fly instructors in,
Oh, wow.
and you can take college courses. Civilian instructors will deploy with us. We have a family resiliency counselor, FRC. Who's kind of like a social worker who will work with people who are having issues. They just now are starting to bring dogs onto the ship. So they have a golden retriever
Good.
on Ike.
They should have done that a long time
I
ago.
know.
Yeah.
I know. It's great. And I think the chaplain runs that program, and the dog can walk around and provide comfort. So there's that. I got into CrossFit my last Nimitz deployment. There was a guy who's I think now owns a CrossFit gym and got out, and he was amazing, and he had his own CrossFit program that he did every single day, and that really gave me a lot of routine and purpose. So yeah.
Now, in movies from the 50s, 60s, the super gung-ho war movies about World War II that were just a decade or so past that time, the ships in the Pacific were always, in the movies, the ships were always stopping so that the sailors could jump into the ocean and swim with the dolphins.
Like frivolity.
And visit the island women of whatever
Tahiti,
South
yes.
Pacific.
Yes.
Yeah.
How common is that sort of thing? The swimming in the ocean.
Oh, swim call. So they usually do at least 1 or 2 swim calls. And I can remember, I'm trying to remember the most memorable one. When I was on USS Boxer, that's an LHA and an amphib ship, to do a swim call on the well deck. That's pretty cool. So the well deck is, where they have the big amphib, I don't know, all the AV vehicles, the big ginormous marine vehicles that go in and out. But they would fill it up with water, and people could swim in there. And I remember thinking, how odd is that? That
It
you're
doesn't take much for the Marines.
swimming in a well deck.
Yeah.
They eat crayons.
Yeah.
God bless them.
But there's other crazy things like hitting golf balls off the aft end of the ship. I mean, people do that. That's like a thing. We have a thing called the Steel Beach Picnic. So every now and again, they'll bring up like grill and hot dogs onto the flight deck, and they'll just set up a basketball court. And we've even had rock bands come. I helped hosted on Boxer a Latino funk band. They were Experimento, and they came out. They were excellent, and we
Probably a good live show, huh?
yeah, it was a great live show, and we they put on a great performance, and the crew loved it, and it was just a good way to let off a little bit of steam, because I mean every day you are working 12 to 14 hour days, and usually maybe Sunday will be a half day, but it's a pretty routine life, and especially for some of these guys that don't even get port visits. Like during COVID, a lot of the ships didn't get port visits. I want to say even the guys that just did that Red Sea deployment, I don't think they got very many port visits. Obviously, they were getting shot at. So it can be a really, really stressful experience, just depending on the deployment.
Okay. Before we move on to the next phase, what was the coolest place you got to do a port visit?
That's a good question.
At least while you were enlisted.
Yep.
So we can keep it in chronological order here.
Yeah. Okay. So enlisted, I would say Singapore, and that was because I met up with locals, and I was able to just kind of get out there. That was before the days that they were really, really pushing the Liberty Buddy policy. And again, I've always been a person that kind of can do my own thing, and I always loved being able to just get out on my own and by myself and just kind of be one with the community and meet people. And I would say Singapore was a very memorable port visit because of that. But that was just not because I loved Singapore, but because I just got out there and just got to meet some local people and just enjoy myself and not feel like I was a sailor for those few days that I was there. So I really enjoyed that.
And it's one of the safest places on planet Earth.
Yeah.
Isn't it also one of the cleanest?
It was.
Yes.
Yeah. And it was beautiful city. Yeah. So I would say that was probably one of the most memorable. Each port visit has its own charm and uniqueness about it. They do a lot of what we call MWR tours, where you can get out and kind of see different places.
They have the different structured programs for every time somebody's in port.
Yeah. Okay.
So at some point, you decide that you want to become an officer.
Right.
So kind of walk us through how that came to pass.
So I was still in my squadron. This is during that. It was the first deployment that I did with VS-35. And I remember a guy by the name of Howie Warren. Howard, him and this other guy, Pete Antonacci. They were two of the pilots one was an NFO, one was a pilot, naval flight officer. The other was a pilot. And they would always come and, just talk to me, ask me how I'm doing. And they just, I don't know, they took an interest in me in a way that was just nobody else did. I mean, just kind of took me under their wing and they would talk to me, ask me how I was doing. And I still keep in touch with both of them to this day. And I remember Howie had talked to me a while back about, like, I really think that you would make an excellent officer. You're very thoughtful. You have a lot of empathy. I think you would really make a good mentor to other people. And I remember just not like being able to see myself that way. Like I just thought like officers were so, like, oh no, I could never do that. I just didn't think enough of myself to do it. But I'd say after a couple years went by, it was maybe a year and a half, and I started looking into, well, what does an officer program entail? What are the qualifications? And I started like reading through, and I was doing pretty well as an electrician during this time. I was getting good fitness, good evals, good evaluations. I think I was sailor of the quarter one of those times. I was doing well on my fitness tests. So I started seeing that there were things that I was hitting that could possibly make me eligible. And that was like, whoa, wait a minute, is this something I could do? And I was sort of at a crossroads because I didn't envision myself going on to maintenance control or going on to QA, quality assurance. And that's sort of the path of a maintainer, is that you'll eventually become I was a work center supervisor, but you'll be a work center supervisor, then you'll be the leading petty officer, then you'll go to maintenance control as a chief, or you go to quality assurance as a first class, and then you'd go to maintenance control as a chief. So that was the path that I could go down for enlisted, and I just didn't have the passion for electronics. I wasn't the person that was saving the day. I was the person that was doing the quick fixes. I was the person qualified to turn up all the gear. So I knew that my life couldn't go down that path and be fulfilling. But I also didn't know like what I wanted to do as an officer. So I had to kind of make a decision about, is this something I really want to do? And the deciding factor was the fact that I could go to college, because I hadn't been to college yet. And I was like, well, this will allow me to get my bachelor's degree. And then once I'm in college, then I'll figure it out. I'll figure out what I'm supposed to do. And so I really kind of did it to say, well, let's just put it in there and see what they say, see what happens. And then it became sort of this obsession. Like everything I do, I sort of go down this rabbit hole where it becomes, oh my gosh, I've got to do this. And then I get stressed about it. And I did the same thing about the officer program. Like I had to have perfect fitness tests. I had to take a SAT and I had to take an SAT. And I just studied nonstop on that deployment for my SAT. I can remember sitting in the ready room where I had to stand watch. And that's all those guys would do, is they see me with my SAT practice books. And I also like saw it like, oh man, this will get me to where I want to be. I know I don't want to be an AE. I don't know what I want to do, but maybe this will get me where I should be.
It was a path.
And so I fortunately got picked up. But I knew that I had this psychotic episode in my record. And I was really worried about it. And to the credit of Commander Greg Looney, he's out now, and we still keep in touch too. He allowed me to put in that package, knowing that I had this. Because I had to be honest with my squadrons and say, I'm going to put in this package, but there's this thing from my past, and it might come up. Well, he said, just put it in anyway. Even though I had seen a psychiatrist who told me, oh, you probably have bipolar with psychotic features, you have this, you have that, you're probably not going to be able to get selected. And I said, well, why can't I at least put in the package? And my commanding officer was like, no, you're putting in the package. So I did, and I got selected. Well, then as soon as I got selected, they saw in my package and they tried to deny me. And my commanding officer got on the phone with BUMED and said, no, we're going to get her another evaluation from the ship's psychologist on board USS Abraham Lincoln. We're going to send that to you, and we'd like you to reconsider her package. And that's what we did. I went and saw Susan Rice. I can't believe I'm remembering all this. Like, I've never really told this story. And I went and
These people were critical to your path.
Yeah. I mean, to this day, Greg Looney still looks at my Facebook stories. And I think I had invited into my commissioning and a couple other things, but just hadn't worked out. And so they said, no, we're gonna have Susan look at you. So Susan, and I was still going through stressful times, by the way. I was still kind of being bullied. I wasn't having this great, I was still having re-traumatizing experiences because I think we all do as we go through life. We're all kind of a little bit messed up in some way, and I think we just kind of slowly get better and better. And but she was like, yeah, you're not on any medication. You're seeing people for adjustment stuff, and I was, and talking to people, and she's like, you're fine, and we think you would make a great candidate for that. And so she wrote me a very, very positive psychiatric evaluation, and we sent it to BUMED, and BUMED said, okay, fine. And that was how I ended up going to college and getting my bachelor's.
And this was what year?
When
you went off to college?
2004 to 2006.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's still so bizarre to me that they approved your packet.
Yeah.
And then immediately said,
Denied
we were just kidding.
Yeah, because they didn't see that in my board. They didn't. So the process isn't as good as it probably is now. So there was no medical board or medical clearance ahead of time for me to put the package in. And so what happened is they saw it once the package was put in, probably because I brought it to their attention too. I don't even remember that part of it, but I just remember I got a rejection letter initially. And then Commander Looney was like, but don't freak out about this. He's like, we're going to take care of it. He's like, I've already been on the phone with BUMED. I mean, calling from the ship while the ship was at sea, calling back to DC and saying, no, she got selected for this program. Let's get her another evaluation and see where she is now. Because by then this had happened in 98, and we're now in 2003. So this was 5 years later, and no incident since then.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's not really all that surprising to me. I mean, the promotion list comes out, and you get your sequence number or whatever, and then you're slowly moving up the list because people fall off when the packet gets dug into a little bit deeper, or when the records get dug into a little bit deeper. So that's not.
Dan, you're exactly right. That is exactly what happens.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad your commander invoked the ancient code of no givesies backsies. Yes.
Well,
I remember thinking this isn't going to work. I mean, because I'm sort of oh my gosh, the worst is going to happen. I have sort of this reset of what's the catch, and I have to watch myself on that. But he was really all about it. He was very positive. He was like, no, you've done nothing but good work here, and we trust you, and we think that you'll make a fantastic officer.
That's good.
Well, we will get into that next, but for right now, let's take a break.
Awesome.
So, your packet's approved, you're good to go, you're off to school. Where did you go to school? Or, I guess, where did you begin the transition to the dark side?
So I was supposed to originally go to University of San Diego. And I had applied there, been accepted. And then I met my first husband when I was in Tiverton. He lived in Tiverton, Rhode Island, and I was going through Boost and NSI. So before you go to your officer schools, before you go to college, if you scored lower on your SATs or your ACTs, they would send you to Boost to get a little bit of a crash course in
like a prep course, basically.
Prep course in English, calculus, and physics. Because regardless of your major, as an officer back then, don't know how it is today, you had to have 2 semesters of calculus and 2 semesters of physics, because we are, of course, a mostly engineering Navy. And so the Navy is training people to be in the STEM fields. Mm-hmm. And so because I didn't have a strong math background, or my math score, I think, was like right at the cutoff.
That's because math is dumb.
Math is very, very hard, very frustrating. But for many people, I suppose, if you're an engineer or if you're an architect, or even my husband, when he does, when he's building something, he uses math all the time for things. So it is important. But as at that point, I didn't know that I was going to become a communicator. But I did know that I had a much more of an aptitude for English versus for math. So I went to NSI in Boost, and that's where I met my first husband. And I took to his family. I didn't have a very close relationship with my family, and so his family became my family. And he proposed to me within like 2 weeks of meeting me, and we just had this like whirlwind relationship, and we were going to get married. So the decision was made for me to change my college. It was more important for me to stay with my husband. He was very attached and tied to Rhode Island at the time. He was willing to move with me later. I knew that
he was not in the service?
No, he was a civilian. I met him online on Yahoo Personals.
Gotcha.
Back when online dating wasn't even really a thing.
Back when that was a thing, yeah.
So, yeah. And, I was like living in the barracks, and I remember my friend, Jen Wiest, was my roommate, and she had a live journal website. And I was like, live journal? What's that? And she was just a whiz at like any kind of things on the computer. And she was, and I remember I was lonely, and, I wanted to maybe meet somebody. I think I was grieving over some guy that didn't want to date me anymore. And so she said, well, why don't you just get a profile on this dating site? And I was like, oh, maybe, how do I do that? And she walked me through it and everything. And that's how I got on there. And me and Shane started talking, and wound up getting along really well. And I was, like I said, I was close with his family. So the decision was made for me to go to the closest college that had an NROTC program was Worcester State University in Massachusetts. So I went to Worcester State University, WSU, and then they had a ROTC unit at NROTC Holy Cross.
Yep, sure.
Yeah. Yep. So that was what I did. I went there for, it was a 36-month program, I want to say. But I want to say that they took some of my previous college credits, and I was only there for 2 years. Yeah, because I started Boost and NSI in 2003, and then 2004 to 2006, I was I was at Worcester. And I learned about the public affairs community right before I started college, which was very fortunate. I went to a muscular dystrophy camp, and I ended up learning that there were things called PAOs. I had no idea there was a PAO in the Navy. And I started learning about how do you become a PAO, because it's not something you can just immediately do as an officer. You have to go into another community first.
Mm-hmm. Same with the Army.
Yep. So I was told that you could go surface warfare first, and surface warfare was one of the easier communities to transition out of. So that's what I did. I got my undergrad in communications. I interned at a marketing department at a newspaper, the Worcester Telegram and Gazette. That was a really great experience. I got to write some articles. And then I graduated and got my commission on the same day. So you graduate from college, you walk for college, and then you do your commissioning ceremony at the same time. My parents came to that. My husband was there. I think my husband's parents were there too. And then I went off to USS Russell. That was my first ship in Hawaii. It was the destroyer.
Your commissioning program, was that the naval equivalent of, in the Army, we call it the green to gold? So you're still drawing your enlisted pay and all.
Absolutely.
There's some provisos in there, but you have not separated from the service.
I was still active duty.
Okay.
I was an E 5 through most of the program, but because I had always been a person that studied really hard for my ratings exams, even though I really didn't know electronics very well, I was very good at memorizing. I would just memorize things that I didn't even understand, just so I could do well on the tests. And so I made E6 in the program. So I went from E6 to ensign as an officer, and I went to USS Russell, and I was the OI, Operations and Intelligence Division Officer. So I was I wasn't really that young, I guess. I was 30, and everybody else was a lot younger. But that was my first ship.
Go ahead.
So you said that that was going to be an easier way for you to transition to being public affairs. Mm-hmm. How long did it take for you to be able to make that transition? Well,
fortunately, like I say, it's funny how, in your life, you just run into just the right people sometimes. And in my case, I happened to work he's now an Admiral, Admiral Brad Cooper. He's actually the Deputy 5th Fleet. Maybe will be our next CNO. I don't know. But he was my commanding officer, and he was all about getting USS Russell all over the news, all over the paper, anything that we could do to promote the ship. And so
in a positive way,
yes.
That's implied, yes.
I mean there are some
negative ways to get the news out there, which we don't want to do.
Had a rough time lately.
Yes. This was more on the positive side. And as a PAO, I couldn't really release anything. Like, I didn't have release authority. I had to go through the base PAO or the fleet PAOs just to put out information. But that's where I really learned how to be a communicator, was at this ship, because during that year and a half that I was there, I just kept pumping stories out. I learned how to take imagery. I learned how to design. I learned how to design the calendar. And I had a Divo job where I shared because we had too many ensigns. This was one of the time we were flooding the officer community with a lot of junior officers. See, and it's funny because they're kind of doing the same thing right now in the PAO community. So I feel like whenever we have a dearth of people at a certain pay grade, then they start to just fill it up at the lower pay grades, because they know the people that are older.
It's like you can get the same job done for less money.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and they're more of we'll maybe talk about this later, but they're more the converted. Like, you can get more of those younger people, and you're going to lose some of those people here and there, so you just fill them up. And so we had too many ensigns on my ship. So that was also very fortuitous, because I was able to not only share my Divo job with an experienced LDO who handled a lot of the combat information and all that stuff, and I handled all the personnel and admin stuff. But at the same time, I was the collateral duty PAO. And so I was able to write stories for the ship, take pictures, do ship tours, escort media a little bit. And it really taught me a lot about my craft.
Because you were not actually a public affairs officer yet. It was just an additional responsibility.
Exactly.
For
practicing
you. So
without a license.
It was on the job training.
It was a collateral duty, and we didn't have an enlisted mass communications specialist. Nowadays, most destroyers have an MC, especially when they go out to sea. I didn't have that, so I was the MC. So it was a great opportunity. I just walk around with my camera everywhere and just take pictures, write stories. I remember Chief Rush was the. It's so interesting how, I'm surprised I'm remembering so many of these names as we go through these stories. But Chief Rush was the base chief over at Navy Region Hawaii, and him and Agnes Taeyeon, she was the base PAO. They were really, really helpful in helping me become a PAO. And I actually worked on the USS Oklahoma Memorial when we were pierside. So they gave me opportunities to just go over there and volunteer in my spare time. So that was what I did for a year and a half. I just trained to become a PAO. Then in 2008, after one package that did not get submitted because they just weren't going to give up any ensigns during that time, my second package to become a PAO was accepted. And that's how I got transferred.
Did you have to go to any additional... Now that you're transferring over to a different field, did you have to go to additional training to become a propagandist? Sorry, spin doctors. Sorry, public affairs.
No, a professional communicator.
Strike one, Dan.
Or a communicate. Some people say communication practitioner. I don't like that.
Practitioner.
I know. I find that interesting. No, I would say a professional communicator. But No, I had to go to Defense Information School in Fort Meade, Maryland. So I went there. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it was a 6-week course. And it's very basic. I mean, it's how do you write talking points? How do you do public affairs guidance? How do you speak on camera and answer questions? How do you bridge to the thing you want to talk about versus the thing that people are asking you about? So it's very, 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 and it was nothing about social media. Back then, I think Facebook was just becoming a thing. So it wasn't like it is now.
How much of your on-the-job training when you weren't actually a PAO was, I guess, not applicable, but relatable to what you were learning?
It was totally invaluable. Class. Oh, yeah. Okay. It was, I mean, because I felt like I sort of had a leg up because I already knew how to write a story. I already understood a lot of the tactics of being a PAO. And I will say it was somewhat of a letdown when I became a PAO that I wasn't going to get to do the tactics anymore because I have an enlisted background. I'm a doer. And so I was used to just getting in there and doing. And then they're like, oh, no, now you're going to be in charge of the people that are the doers. But because I'd been a doer, like I knew how to do things. I wasn't maybe and video editing is incredibly hard, and graphic design. Those are the two hardest crafts that I think you really have to be a very seasoned professional to do those well. But I know good editing, good video editing. I know bad video editing. I understand framing and rule of thirds and just the basics to where I could do those things. And so it really helped me when I was at DIMFOS, and I didn't find any parts of DIMFOS to be challenging. Like, remember I told you during the Aviation Electrician days, I'd go to A school and be like, oh, I can't pass this test. That never happened at DIMFOS. Like, it was just like, I was in my zone.
Were there people that struggled with it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There were people that just weren't really suited for it. Like, people that you knew weren't, like, why are you a professional communicator? You don't love what you're, like, I love this field. Like, this is something that's so interesting to me. Telling stories, promoting the work, figuring out what the hook is, understanding, like, okay, what's the most important part of this event? And what should we emphasize in this story? Like, I find that to be really interesting. And I wouldn't say there's people that struggled in terms of like, oh, we're going to fail you because it's not like math or anything like that. But there were people that you just could tell, like, why are they here? Like, they don't love it.
Suited for it.
Yeah, you have to be a double volunteer at this point, right? Like, you volunteered to be in the Navy and you volunteered to change your career field to come over here.
Right.
So.
I busted my ass to get this job. And like, this wasn't the first thing that they offered me. I had to maneuver my way into this field. And so it was interesting to me to be around the people that I could tell just... So part of the reason too is because there are fields that you get kicked out of but for whatever reason. I wouldn't say kicked out. That's the wrong way to say it. There are fields that you may not pass, like because of your medical issues or something happens where you're just no longer qualified for that particular designator.
Involuntary change of specialty.
Yeah. I mean, it happens in the Army too. Mm-hmm. And so I would always get really irritated when I'd see people that were in the communication business that didn't want it or that just took it because it was the only thing left to do. And you could kind of tell when that happened. And so, but yeah, no, I enjoyed Defense Information School. I made great friends. I was with my people. Like, it's different when you're with your tribe, and that's how I feel about PIOs today. I can be around. I just came from NATO, and I had Bill Urban and who was the other one? Arlo and Zach Harrell and Arlo. He was the guy that relieved me, and it was the four of us sitting there. And this is in Germany at a NATO communicators conference. And I just remember, like, I walked away from the table and I was like, oh, this is what it's like to be with, like, people that, like, see the same things I do and know my field, and they know all this, and they're all great guys. And that's what I love. I do love being a PAO. Like, this is not, me leaving the Navy isn't because I don't want to do my job anymore. It's because I've gotten to a point where the change that I can impact is only so much, and now I want to move on into another area. But I love being a communicator.
Okay. Well, let's use that as a point to transition, because normally we would go through your entire career, but your career is not yet over.
No.
So now that you're a public affairs officer, you're going about and you're doing your thing. At what point did you say, I'm going to start podcasting?
So I started it when I was at a joint command. I mean, anybody can go back into I guess I'll just say I was at Joint Planning Support Element, GIPSY, and Joint Enabling Capabilities Command, and I wasn't very happy there. I didn't feel like I had the flexibility and the maneuvering room to really make an impact for various reasons. I won't go into too much detail about that, but I just kind of felt stifled, and I was having a hard time getting sent on missions. I was trying. I was ready. I could deploy. I wasn't having my shoulder issues at that time. I ended up having shoulder surgery. I was there, but initially I just wanted to get out the door and go on missions, and I found myself having to kind of like hustle for my worth and hustle to be seen. I had a boss who didn't think that I was very. He had a very combat mentality, and I think he just didn't feel, and I could tell that he just didn't feel like I was suitable for certain types of operations in public affairs. And as a PAO, you are not on the front lines by any means, but in his mind you are. And he just, maybe he was trying to protect me. That's the best explanation, but it really infuriated me because I kept saying I was ready, I want to go out the door, because that was the only way you could promote and really do your job, because in the office they're just, it existed to send people out the door into these combatant commands and work real world operations. Like we did the Afghanistan pullout, they did Operation Warp Speed. So I was just frustrated that I couldn't get out there and do these things, and there wasn't anything that I could do to prove myself in the office, because all we did in the office was admin work and training, and it was just, I felt like it was very much of a bureaucracy. And so I started thinking, well, what can I do? So I was mentoring other PAOs. I was holding boards, like to try to get new PAOs in the community. I would be part of those boards. I was very into my professional accreditation. And I got an opportunity to be part of an anthology. A woman by the name of Karen Hills Pruden. She's a human resources professional in San Diego. I think at a historical black college there in Norfolk. I've actually met her, and she found me on LinkedIn, and she asked me to be a part of her book series. So she writes these different book series for women leaders, sister leaders, as she calls them. And she had me as a part of one of her authors for Complicated Alliances. And it was a very racially diverse group too. There was 2 white ladies and I think maybe 8 black women.
Well, you were in Norfolk. Were there any Filipinos?
No, not on the. There probably should have been on our panel, but I just felt it just was a neat experience. And I will tell you, every one of the black women were just so proud of what they were doing. They were confident, and I just remember it was such a positive experience. We do these Zoom calls together where we were getting our stories together, because we were all either married to somebody who served or we served in the military, and there was one other active duty person. And I'm still in touch with all of them to this day. And there's just a wonderful group of people, such a positive experience. And the fact that she had seen that in me, and then at the same exact time, I was doing webinars for a professional women's leadership association during COVID. And I started doing interviews. And so I think the combination of both of those things kind of prompted me to say, well, wait a minute, could I take the webinars and this opportunity of being an author, could I take this in another direction and not just share my story, but put out the stories of others and people who are doing the things that I admire. They're sticking their neck out there. They're doing things that other people aren't. They're speaking truth to power. That's a big one with me. They're doing things, they're taking risks, calculated risks, but they're taking risks to make an impact and to make our world better. And so I started a show that was really focused on people who give back and are of service, but it really is focused, though, on people that take those paths less traveled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So what was so now you're working for a supervisor who doesn't necessarily, I don't
want to say anything bad about him, because we would get along too. That was the other part.
Is not
a black and white issue.
Employing you in the most beneficial manner.
Right.
You're not reaching your potential.
Yes.
Yeah. He just didn't see that in me, and I think he liked me personally. That's always the caveat with a lot of these people, even the ones that I don't always get along with. I think they like me personally. They just don't. They see that I'm not the mold, or they see that I don't fit what they want.
But you were mostly in office because of that situation.
Yeah, I was.
So you're doing all the admin stuff and training and things like that. But now you're also starting this new project on the side.
Yes.
As well as balancing these outside projects that you've been asked to be part of.
Yes.
How challenging was that?
It was so stressful because, I mean, I didn't want to have to do all those other things, but I just didn't get that opportunity to feel fulfilled on the job. And so when I'm not fulfilled in my work, I think we all do this. We all seek meaning. Like we're meaning creatures, and we're all trying to seek some kind of, like, once you've, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, once you have security, once you have all these other things, you're not in survival mode anymore. You're looking for more purpose.
Yeah.
And because I wasn't getting purpose at work, I had to find purpose elsewhere. And so that's what I was doing, and it was exhausting because I would have loved to have had purpose in the office, but I just really didn't agree. Like, I don't agree with the model of let's just sit in the office from 8 to 4 because that's what we're supposed to do. And even when we don't have something to do, we'll all sit there, and then, oh, by the way, we're all going to gather around the power player, and it's going to be this little angling of things, and then like my
palace intrigue.
Right. I mean, we've all been in offices that are like that, and they're just so. Ugh. Yeah. And like I said, I'd have these amazing talks with the same supervisor. We both love podcasts. We both would talk about Joe Rogan and Jocko, and I remember he told me only guys like Jocko do podcasts. And and he would. I know, he would, just because he had this kind of like special forces. He was a vet bro kind of thing, and I remember when I told him I started my podcast, he just like rolled his eyes, and he definitely didn't think it was something I should be doing. He didn't think I should do the book thing. He just thought that all this stuff was self-promotion. He didn't understand that this was ways that I was trying to make a difference, make an impact, trying to make my world better, trying to feel fulfilled, find that purpose and that meaning. But that's the thing, like, I always try to caveat, like, I get a lot of people that contact me about toxic work environments. And I always say those situations are so not black and white. There's not always just one good guy, one bad guy. There are these very complicated things that happen. But yeah, to your point, I felt very much torn. And that was when I started going down another road.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, kind of similar to what Dan asked, seeing as though you're still on active duty, did you have to get any kind of legal reviews, or, because I don't, this term activist can often have a pejorative ring to it, which is not what I intend, but it seems to me like in a lot of ways you're trying to be an activist because you're trying to enact change, right? So have you had any legal reviews? Did you get one prior to starting? Have you had any issues since you started? That's
a great question. Before I started, I consulted like the number 2 in the public affairs community because I was doing webinars. I was also the Eastern Regional Mentorship Program Coordinator.
So just one more responsibility on top of everything else.
One more.
That means she's untouchable, though.
How much purpose can you need?
I know, it was kind of getting bad, but that shows you how underutilized I was. I mean, I had all this time to do a million other things because, and I would try to get out and go on these deployments and these missions, and I just wasn't getting picked to go, and it was quite frustrating. And so, yeah, I ended up interviewing, and I still have the show on my YouTube page, like our number 2 at Chimfo. And he's a great guy, but and likes me personally. Again, it's the same. It's a story of my life with people that don't like me, but don't always like what I'm doing. And we can have a friendly and professional disagreement about that. And so I could tell he wasn't going to tell me not to do it, but he wasn't going to support it. And his attitude, and many people do see it this way, so I'm going to play the devil's advocate, which is, if you don't want to comport to the party line, find another job. This is your job. And there are people that see it that way. Yeah. And it is a valid point, and I don't know if I thread that needle perfectly. All I can say is that if you can write a letter to the editor, if you can respectfully push change through a professional journal, or wherever else, what makes what I'm doing so different? And I think the public understands that. I think reporters understand that. But I think we're still in this weird gray area. Where it really gets interesting is with reservists. So reservists and National Guard can run for office. Tulsi Gabbard can
also a civil affairs officer.
Yeah. I mean, what? Oh, yeah, she's a civil. I didn't know she was civil affairs. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's National Guard, Army National Guard. Lieutenant.
Reserve. She's a reserve.
Or, I'm sorry, reserve. And she's a lieutenant colonel.
She is.
And, I mean, she's all over the place with politics. But they are not on active duty. When they are not on active duty, they don't fall under the UCMJ. So I've been digging into this issue because I thought about wanting to monetize my podcast. But as I'm digging into this issue more, I'm realizing that there is a divide. But to the American public, they just know that person serves in the military. Mm-hmm. So why is there a divide? Why are reservists allowed to do all this stuff and no one cares? Nobody questions Tulsi's service or says, oh, you're not patriotic or you don't love the Army because you're criticizing, I almost said Trump, of Kamala Harris. But nobody's questioning that because they understand that, yes, she's still a professional. She still serves her nation honorably. But off duty, out of uniform, she's someone else. And so, I'm curious as we move forward as a military, if we'll start to see active duty. I would like to think one day we'll see active duty the same way because I believe that I can be an activist and respectfully question things. Now, could I do this at the same command that owns those programs? Hell no. So if I'm at Navy Personnel Command and I'm talking about a recruiting program that I don't agree with off duty, well, heck no. No, I'm part of that system. But if I'm in a completely different command, why not? In my off duty, unofficial, but people don't always agree with me on this. So some people love what I'm doing and they support it. Even if they don't want to say so publicly, they do.
There's that.
There's that. And then there are some people who don't agree with it at all, and I've unfortunately lost friends over it.
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways to make your organization a learning organization, and again, there's lots of schools of thought on this. But at the end of the day, if you're going to create a autocratic system that nobody's ever questioned at the top, I mean, that's not a learning organization, and you're going to, I mean, history is replete with examples of organizations that refuse to learn. I mean,
if you are too rigid, you will be broken easily.
Yeah.
How much do you think it is because of, I mean, active duty forces, obviously, being able to do it respectfully is drawing the line? Because let's be honest, if you open the floodgates, there's going to be a lot of people who cannot handle doing it respectively, and that would damage the force.
But I think you can police it because they police it with the reservists.
Yeah.
If there was a reservist that was out there doing something that was just so disrespectful and contemptuous, I just learned about contemptuous language, and I spent some time studying Article 88 before coming over here, just because I wanted to learn. I mean, I'm really wanting to understand what are the limits of free speech for active duty, because as I go to this new command, I'm going to fall back under Navy. I'm working with Navy Seabees, best rating in the Navy, one of the best. Well, maybe not as great as AEs, but they're really a wonderful community, and I'm really excited to be a PAO for them. But I'm going to fall under Navy again, and I started my podcast in a joint operations environment. So I was kind of away from the head shed.
Away from the flagpole.
Yeah. Then I went to NATO, where I couldn't have been further away from the flagpole. And NATO's all about freedom of speech and freedom of expression and democracy. So they didn't care. I mean, and I wasn't talking about NATO. Like, I didn't go into anything about political NATO stuff. I'm very smart about, even if I have personal opinions about my own command, I'm never going to throw my own command under the bus, because that's my job. I have an allegiance to that command and to serve them. Some see it differently, though, because my allegiance should be about Team Navy, all of Navy. So that's how this person at Chimfo sees it. So I understand his perspective. I really do. I don't completely agree with it. I believe, to your point, we would have to educate the force. This would take so much education. It would take so much understanding, and I just don't think that, sadly, that the DoD wants to invest that.
Invest the time and money.
Invest the time and money.
Yeah.
And I don't think they want people questioning them.
I 100% agree with that.
They just don't think it's worth it.
I mean, COVID showed us that.
Yeah. And I think that's to their detriment. I really do, because I think that the kinds of conversations that I could have with the generals and the flag officers, if they were willing to let me ask them hard questions, would build so much trust and understanding. But I've had a few come close to wanting to talk to me, and then they always back out. And it's really sad.
Well, I mean, if we're thinking about it from combat capability, right? Because our entire military is about combat, right? In one way, shape, or form. You've got to have leaders and personnel that are flexible and free thinking.
Right.
And if you take that away, what military capability do we have?
Well, I was just on the cruise ship, and they had 2 veterans events, and one of the things that came through in both of those events is how badly the military in a combat situation has become, where people don't feel like they're trying to fight a war with their arms around their hands behind their back, because they're not empowered to make decisions on the battlefield. And I do believe that a lot of that comes back to, like what you said, is that we don't encourage free thinking, and we don't encourage people to speak truth to power and to be willing to speak up and to speak out. And there is a way to do it where you choose your battles. You fight it as well as best you can, and then you know when to walk away, and you know when to just say, okay, I don't agree with it, but I'm going to do it.
Yeah, well, like you said, pick your battles. Know when to bite your tongue, and then know when to speak up.
Yeah.
Yep. So, but I mean, I will say, to the military's credit, I'm still doing my podcast. I haven't been shut down. I don't monetize. That's been a good best practice. There is no law that says I cannot monetize, but there are people who would say I'm using my official capacity on active duty as a part of my brand, and so therefore I could be seen as profiting from that brand. Yeah. I think that's ridiculous. I mean, the money I'd ever make off my show would maybe just pay for some of my posting services or something. It would help a little, but it's not, again, pick your battles. Is it worth it for me to fight that issue for maybe another couple more years that I have on active duty? And I'm still doing so much good with the show. I'd like to think I'm doing good with the show. And I have a lot of shows too that are not always activism related or controversial-ish. Yeah. So I don't want
you had us on.
Well, you guys are, but you guys are free thinking and able to talk about things. But yeah, you guys aren't whistleblowers, right?
Right.
So if I have a whistleblower on, I'm having a show this Thursday about the Ferris Doctrine. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. That's where it's a doctrine that has been referred back to from the Supreme Court, and you cannot sue the DoD. So if you have a surgery that goes wrong, which is what my guest had, who's now paralyzed for life because of it, he has no recourse other than just his 100% VA disability. And I think it's unfortunate, because I think there are people who do get pretty hosed up somehow through people who've been sexually assaulted, other things have happened, and they have no recourse to claim for any kind of damages or compensation. And so we're going to dig into that issue. And so I just consider it such a privilege and such an honor that they would ask me to do that. Well, they didn't. I approached them and said, I want to do my part to help, after I heard how bad this went and the story about it. But I'm just so grateful that I can still continue to do the show. So at this point, I also give credit to the DoD for even allowing me to continue to do the show, because they could have shut me down, and they haven't.
Okay. So you've still got a few years left. It's getting short. Are you planning to continue the podcast after retirement?
Yes. Oh, totally. I mean, I would do this without making any money. Like, this would be something that I could see myself doing when I'm 60, 70 years old. I don't see any reason to ever stop doing it unless I get sick or something were to happen. I need to take care of my parents or, something like that, or my husband. But I see it as so much more than just a podcast. I see it as a mission. Yeah. And it's
that purpose.
Yeah. It gives me a sense of belonging. It ties me to my community. I also have this great love for animals, and I have this whole advocacy side of how I got started doing advocacy with puppy mill protests and other things. So I can see myself going down that road and doing more with the animal side. But now I've gotten kind of into the military advocacy side. But I'm taking a lot of the same things I learned in animal advocacy, and I'm just applying it and using it again here, but I absolutely love doing it. It's a lot of work, but it's so much fun because I learn so much. Like you guys learn so much probably from all your guests who come on. It's crazy.
Crazy is a good word for it. Or maddening.
Oh, it is. I mean, because it never stops. And that is the thing about having a show that you run. You have to put a limit on it and say, okay, I'm going to be happy with it only being this much. Yeah. Because it can just engulf you and become everything.
I have not smashed my computer yet, so...
I'm impressed.
I'm impressed myself.
Well, I'm impressed with all your editing. It's amazing when I listen to some of your shows and all the different tweaks and the things that you guys are doing to put together these stories. It's not easy. I mean, people that put together documentaries, I mean, it's hard work. It really is. So I credit you guys a lot too. And like I've said, I think your show is just going to continue to keep growing.
Well, you gave us our start.
You did, and I want to interject. When originally the idea was Dan's, I kind of helped him craft it, but the original idea was his. And we were talking, and it's like, man, there's no other podcasts out there. And this is turned out to be totally wrong, by the way. But
yes.
Our initial idea was, there's no other podcasts out there where they're featuring service members telling their stories. That's bullcrap. And then, we went and did some actual research and came to find, no, actually there are. And yours was one of the first ones that popped up. So that's how we that's our origin story there. And so that's when we reached out to you. Like, she obviously has her act together and let's take a spell and quit being ignorant and actually learn how to do this. And that's when we reached out to you. And Dan got his little green book out. Yes, I did. Dan still has a green book.
I have a box of them.
Oh, those green books are amazing. I mean, you can write everything down there and just go through them. I have, in fact, there's even a podcast called Green Notebook.
Yeah. He still has that from that conversation too.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. I keep all that stuff.
Yeah.
That's how I have become a font of useless information. But before we let you go here, do you want to go ahead and tell the people where to find you and the name of the show and all the stuff you're doing?
Yeah, so it's called the Stories of Service Podcast. The tagline is ordinary people who do extraordinary work, because I want to show that everyone plays a part, and I believe that everyone has a story. I do. Everyone may not want to tell their story, but everyone, I believe, has some sort of story that will help others and will be a benefit to the collective. And I have a particular emphasis for people who take risks and stick their necks out there. I just really admire people that can stand up when others can't, and are willing to either speak about their story or promote others whose story needs to be told. You can find me on Spotify, on the web. I also have a blog called Theresas Tapestries. I don't blog very often, but I'm going to be doing one about how I moved my boxer dog, because I moved her as my husband's service dog to London and then back on the Queen Mary for a transatlantic cruise. And so those are both very non-conventional ways of moving an animal overseas. And so I thought that might be beneficial to service members. But I'm very active on LinkedIn. I've got maybe 12,000 followers. That doesn't really matter, but it's just, I have a wide reach. And so I'm able to get a lot of different people who reach out to me, want to be a guest. I'm on Instagram and I'm on Facebook. I think that's about it. I don't have time.
She says that's it.
I don't have time for TikTok or X. I don't even think I have a TikTok account anymore, but yeah, you can't do them all. You have to figure out
picking the battles, right?
Yeah, picking those battles.
And Stories of Service is SOS, and she's in the Navy. See, that's very clever.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. And SOS, you need help. So there's also that too.
There you go.
So it works on multiple levels.
Yes. So
to shut it down here, we normally ask, did you leave on your own terms? Well, you have not left yet. Right. So maybe a better way to ask the question is, are things winding down on your own terms?
Mostly, yes. I think there was this little part of me that just wanted them to want me. And as I put in my last evaluation, I didn't tell them I wanted a career-ending evaluation, but I kind of got one. And I'm not upset about it. I actually wrote the person who did it and thanked him, because I think that my ego would have just wanted to just keep pushing for it, just because I like being recognized. I think we all do. We like being validated. But then there's that part of me that knew I was done. So I'm glad it happened. But I think that ultimately I got to a place where I just didn't think that the impact that I wanted to make was going to be within the military. But I still wanted to settle down stateside. I still wanted to be in a really good place, and the Navy worked so well with me and found a community of awesome people. I mean, if you guys know anything about the Navy Seabees, they're the engineers. I mean, you guys could do a whole show about historical Navy Seabees they do all the buildings, the roads, the bridges, the welding. I mean, I'm gonna have way better stories.
I've worked with them in the Pacific before.
Yeah, they're amazing. Yeah. And so the Navy couldn't have asked. And as a doer myself, can do Navy. So yeah, I think that ultimately I left on the best possible terms for what I personally needed, if that makes sense.
Do you have any parting wisdom that you would like to pass off to any aspiring, people that possibly want to join the military, or people who are maybe at a decision point in their careers?
Yeah.
The floor is yours.
Okay. I think that the Navy was the best thing that ever happened to me. I think that if I hadn't joined the military, I would have stayed lost a lot longer, but it forced me to grow up, accept responsibility. I had a lot of stumbles, but I was always lucky in that there was someone at some point who saw something in me and was able to keep pushing me to the next level. So I would say definitely go into the Navy, but be very intentional about what jobs you'll take, and be able to pivot when the fit isn't there anymore, and be open to it. I mean, there are so many different jobs that are available if you do the research and you get to know the right people, and just allow yourself to have those opportunities and then give back once you're in those positions. It's important to me to continue to grow the next generation of public affairs officers and other professional communicators. And I want to eventually show people that you can speak truth to power and still serve and still be on active duty. Like, I want that to be the model one day, because I'm not trying to personally attack these flag officers or any of that. I want to have a educated conversation about policy. And I think that if they're more open to that, they're going to gain so much trust and loyalty. Even if we agree to disagree by the end of the conversation, it's the idea that they'll put themselves in that position and they'll be willing to go on those shows and have those hard conversations. So one day I really do want to see our military leadership having those hard conversations. And if I can impart onto the next generation to push for that to happen, I'll consider that a success story.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, Theresa, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. You guys are great. You asked awesome questions.
You so
much. Thank you.
Yes, we did a whole lot of prep work for this. And by that I mean really none.
Speak for yourself.
It's just veterans talking to veterans here.
No, it was great. I mean, honestly, you guys, there's a real good synergy between the two of you and sort of the questions that you ask. I was telling my husband before I came here, I think you guys said you grew up together and you were friends in high school.
I've been suffering for decades.
So that's so cool, so full circle, for you to get out and come live here, and then you to already be here and already be out, and yeah, so I think it's great.
Life's funny that way.
I know. It is so strange how things just kind of come back around and work out. And I'm just so grateful I got to come here and do this.
Yes.
Sometimes, it's like I said, these opportunities just kind of happen. And I know you make them happen, but it's nice when things work out.
Well, I mean, you put out a lot of effort to be able to make this happen, so thank you.
Yeah.
I mean,
yes.
Well, it's
great.
important.
It was great that we could return the favor.
Yeah.
That you gave us at the very beginning before we even had a camera.
Yeah, nothing.
But I mean, that's again, I really feel like that goes back to the whole giving back thing. If you get to a certain place in your career, wherever you are, you don't have to be at the top of the food chain to give back. I'm still what I would consider a very new podcaster. I'm still I don't think I have a huge following or anything. I'm confident in what I'm doing and I love it, but it is my duty. It's my responsibility and my role when people come to me is to do what I can to support them and to give back to the community. And now it's the podcast community. So.
Okay. So, yeah. What do you think?
That was Interesting. We've talked about it before. We have very limited knowledge of stuff outside our own sphere. So learning more about the Navy was cool. Her development from going through her childhood traumas and then her traumas early on in her career. I think she was very fortunate to have some of the leadership that she did, and she remembered all those names and everything about the leaders that helped her along the way, developing her and constantly encouraging her and letting her grow and get that self-confidence. That is remarkable.
Yeah. They saw her potential.
Yeah.
And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but first, I love how candid she was.
Oh yeah,
she talked about some heavy stuff, and
she was quite frank about some issues.
And I love that she has the confidence to be able to discuss that in a forum like this. I think some of those reckless behaviors that she was exhibiting at that age, first of all, I'm glad she came out on the other side of that and was able to learn from it. I think that a lot of young people, particularly young women, but not just them, need to understand that there's consequences to these actions, and that's the one side. And on the other side, she has a good redemption arc, right? She's able to bounce back from that. She almost gets a rough break when they try to rescind her packet, but she has a commander that goes to bat for her because he saw the potential in her through her own abilities. But potential, right? Because potential is not always based off of how well you're performing
at the moment,
right here in this moment. And it's one of those ineffable things that leaders don't necessarily always have the ability to explain what they see in somebody, but obviously he saw something in her and went to bat, and she has had a pretty successful career out of it. At that linchpin. So
I appreciated that she knew that she wasn't, I guess, the classical learning methods. She wasn't good at, like, even going back into her childhood, and she talked about how she just memorized things. Like she wasn't necessarily learning, but she was memorizing things. And I mean, she was just dead focused on being able to get in this packet or get in this school or being able to get this qualification. And so she just dedicated herself to it. Now it sucks that she wasn't learning, so to speak. She was just memorizing information.
Yeah.
But that shows her focus, that she would do all that. That she had the ability to really bear down and accomplish her goals through that focus.
Yeah, but it is still learning. If you're through rote memory, if you're committing schematics and words, if you're committing that stuff, you're still learning it. You may not necessarily be synthesizing it and analyzing it into something useful at the moment, but those neural pathways are still being created, and it's all still there. And I mean, we kind of joked around, some off camera, some on, about useless trivia. Well, that stuff's up there somewhere. You're going to be able to access that at some point, maybe. So, but anyway, it's still impressive to be able to learn all that stuff. I've certainly never been able to do things like that. So
that's great. Now, her transition to the public affairs office, I guess I don't want to say destiny or fate, but it seems like that was something that she was always kind of geared towards. Even as a younger enlisted sailor, about being able to communicate with other people and being able to empathize, and she talked about two. I don't know if she said that they were officers or if they were senior enlisted, but she had two guys that mentored her and tried to push her towards the officer side because they saw again that potential. And I don't think that they were pushing her towards public affairs, but when they were mentoring her and pushing her towards becoming an officer, they mentioned those things that are necessary for a public affairs officer. So I think those were always there, and for her to actually be able to find her calling, as it were, that's outstanding.
The Greeks would call that a telos, the use or the meaning of something when it's being used for what it was intended for. She found her telos. Yeah. I think that's important because we all need to have a purpose, and that again, to make it more of a macro point of our culture. I think that's why we have so many issues in our culture today, because I think a lot of people haven't really achieved their purpose, and there's a lot of reasons for that.
Yes, purposeless people.
Yeah,
and well, we could go into an entire different direction on that, but we are glad that she found her purpose.
Excuse me.
And part of that has then led us to connect with her over a year ago, and for her to mentor and help us along our journey here.
She played a very critical part in the formation of this show.
Yes, so, very, very, very early on.
Yeah, we're very grateful.
Before we even had a single piece of equipment.
Fair enough. Just a boneheaded idea in a green book.
It's true. It's true.
So, okay. Any parting shots on Miss Theresa?
Nope, I don't think so. If you are, again, she listed her stuff in before we signed off with her, the Stories of Service SOS podcast with Theresa Carpenter, and then all of her social medias and stuff. Give it a shot.
Yeah,
give it a shot.
She's easy to find.
Yeah, she's easy to find, and she talks to some interesting people with some interesting purposes of their own.
Yeah.
So
absolutely,
give it a go. See if it's for you.
Perfect.
So, you have anything else?
I do not. Thank you.
Okay. Well, it's free fire time then.
It is indeed.
Okay.
It's not about superheroes, is it? Not anymore.
No, it's not. It's not about superheroes. But Halloween is coming.
5 weeks.
They of course put out the candy like at the end of July in all the stores, because we just can't. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole.
Well, it's all all the candy corn that was all made in the 1950s in one batch, and they've just been doling it out every October since then. So just remember that when you're eating your candy corn.
But anyway, Halloween is coming, and so it made me think of Halloweens that I had as a kid. Mm-hmm. I was not allowed to trick or treat. Thanks, Mom. But what I wasn't able to do was I was able to stay up late, and we would watch old movies like Jason and the Argonauts, and the
original Clash of the Titans.
The Clash of the Titans, and the original Hercules movies, and the original Wolfman and Swamp Thing, and the Mummy movies, and all the different Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee classics, because they were in so many movies together. Mm-hmm. There's a lot more Dracula and Mummy movies than most people know.
Yeah.
But that also made me, appreciate movies the way I do today. So thanks, Mom. So, in honor of those old movies and Halloween coming up, what are 3 scary movies that are family friendly? So, like all the, Hostel movies and all the blood and gore and all that stuff, the Saw movies, obviously those aren't family friendly.
Yeah.
So, give me, say, 3 family friendly, scary or spooky movies for Halloween.
There's one that jumps right out at me, and it is a Halloween movie, and it is not at all spooky.
If you say Hotel Transylvania.
No. One of my favorite Halloween movies when I was a kid, for Ernest Scared Stupid, was one of my favorite. So again, was it scary? No. Ernest Scared Stupid I would literally roll on the floor laughing when I would watch that movie when I was a kid, maybe young teenager.
Yeah, those movies came out when we were kids.
Yeah,
man.
we were probably 9-10 years old when those came out. Holy smokes!
The earnest movies were funny.
Like gasping for air, I would laugh so hard.
Yeah.
So that's my number one. So family friendly, kind of in the oeuvre of Halloween, but not necessarily Halloween. Just
okay. Yeah, we can expand it then. Yeah.
There's another one jumping out at me. I remember probably mid to late 90s. I think it was Anthony Hopkins and Benicio del Toro. It was a Wolfman type.
I think I remember.
Werewolf. I think it was called The Wolfman or something to that effect. It came out in the 90s. That was a pretty good one. Again, admittedly, I haven't watched it, over 20-something years. It's been a while. I'm not really a big movie guy anymore. I guess that kind of happens when you have young kids in the house.
Oh, but these are supposed to be movies that you can watch with them.
True. So I don't know if that one may have been maybe on the rated R side for a little bit of violence. Kid friendly. So Saw doesn't count? No Hostel?
No.
Those movies were unbearably bad too, by the way. That's not really my style. Oof.
The first one of each of the franchises was actually a good movie. But yes, all the blood and gore and stuff, that's what those franchises became about, rather than the plot and the direction and the writing. So, yeah.
When I was in college, our dear friend Charles made me sit and watch House of a Thousand Corpses with him, and I've still not forgiven him for that. Yes. So I need a third. So let's see. How about Hotel Trent? No. I'll tell you what. Let me think of my third one. Let's kick it back to you.
You did two. I'll do two. That's fine.
Okay.
So the first one would be The Blob with Steve McQueen from like the late.
That was the 60s. I mean,
it was the late 50s, early 60s, something like that. Steve McQueen, the king of cool. He's an amazing actor, but he was like 35 playing an 18-year-old.
That's usually how that works.
Yeah, but still, it's kind of campy. There's obviously no CGI and everything, so the way they do the blob is...
Those are actual blobs from outer space.
It is a great family movie that's kind of spooky, creepy. I wouldn't really call it necessarily horror, but if you want to sit around and watch an old movie with your kids and not worry about blood and gore going anywhere and excessive profanity and violence and things like that, that is a good one.
Okay. And I have my third, but I will wait.
Okay. And then I'm going to, well, you said three, so anything with Peter Cushing in a vampire movie. He's amazing. Old hatchet face. I mean, he did several different roles in a lot of the Dracula movies.
You all know him as Grand Moff Tarkin.
Yes. But he was so good. He was so good. And he was even in a few of the early Sherlock Holmes movies, too, that weren't done by Basil Rathbone. Yeah, he was...
The most English name ever.
I know, right? He still was probably the greatest Sherlock Holmes, though. But, yeah. Anything with Peter Cushing.
Okay.
From that era. Those are all great. And family friendly.
My third. See, again, I don't know if this is in the spirit of your question, because I've never been a horror movie guy, so my take on it's going to be a little bit different. Was it Mars Attacks or When Mars Attacks? It's probably more of a sci-fi comedy or something, I guess. I don't know.
That movie is amazing.
But again, another movie that just
makes... It's like the late 90s.
It was late 90s,
mid to late 90s.
Like falling out off the sofa laughing so hard.
It is...
But it's not spooky in the traditional sense of a,
No, it's not.
But it's kind of a sci-fi, air quotes, horror movie.
Well, I mean, it's like Aliens from Outer Space or War of the Worlds, kind of, aliens show up and what do we do?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And the human reaction to the aliens is the funniest part.
So
Pierce Brosnan.
yes. So do you have a third? Because I want to tack on something to the end of this, but I want you to get your third movie in.
Okay, I guess my third one, since we're branching it out a bit here. Leslie Nielsen, Dracula, Dead and Loving It,
As soon as you said Leslie Nielsen,
or
not Tales from the Hood though. That's a different.
No, but I haven't seen Dracula, Dead and Loving It in quite some time, so I don't know about how kid friendly it is depending on your stuff. But then of course there's Mel Brooks' classic Young Frankenstein.
Okay, yeah.
Or Frankenstein.
Frankenstein, yeah.
Yes, that is hilarious.
That's a great answer. Yeah.
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 So there you go.
It holds up.
A lot of options that if you don't let your kids go out and trick or treat, but you can at least let them stay up and watch good movies with you and let them
when
eat
Mars attacks.
popcorn.
Okay.
Jim Brown was in that movie.
Everybody was.
Pam Grier was in that.
I
movie.
I may have even been in that movie. Okay, I'm gonna tack on because we've drifted into self-indulgence at this point.
It's our show. We can do what we want.
That's right. What is your favorite sci-fi? Again, it's kind of scare quotes horror action sci-fi. You kind of got a lot to work with there. Like, tell me what's your one or two, if you've got them, favorite movies that kind of fall into that. If we're talking about stuff that's scary, sci-fi's on the table.
The first Alien movie was terrifying.
Yes, that was the correct answer. Yes.
Very, very suspenseful, very dramatic. In space, no one can hear you scream. Yeah, that was masterfully done. That would probably be the number one. Now, Aliens would probably be a close second, but that's
Yes.
more of an action
Yes.
action comedy kind of movie. Game over, man. Makes me laugh.
Rest in peace, Bill Paxton.
Oh, rest in peace. But that makes me laugh every single time. Every single time.
So your two answers were the two correct answers that I was looking for. And
Well, I mean, I guess you could throw in. I mean, would Predator fall in there?
yes.
But I mean, that's kind of like an action,
Yeah.
campy comedy, because I mean, all the stereotypical one-liners for
I knew
for
these men,
Arnold.
Green
Yeah.
Berets from Fort Bragg.
Yeah.
What are they doing here?
But the Predator was a sort of scary villain,
Yes.
I mean, if you think about it, I mean,
He's in the trees.
super well-trained soldiers fighting an enemy that they can't possibly fathom. Now, the ridiculousness of coating yourself in mud to hide your heat signature.
You sound as if you don't believe that is based in any real science. Okay. Your answers are sound and excellent choices. I would like to throw in a third one. The Thing, the original one.
Oh, John Carpenter?
It's one of the most terrifying movies I've ever seen in my life.
Yes.
I mean, like, terrifying.
Where they were in
It's the Arctic somewhere,
Yeah,
or Antarctic, one or the other.
Yeah. Frozen.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Alien in space. No one can hear you scream, right? Well, nobody can hear you scream in the middle of a frozen wasteland in the middle of the night with a blizzard going on, and some unspeakable horror is just devastating you and your team.
And I didn't see, because that movie came out in the late
70s,
70s, I guess.
yeah,
I didn't
78,
see it
something
till
like
I was in college, so it's not like I saw it when I was a child, because my folks weren't into the horror movies, so we kind of like skipped all that. I must have been 19 when I saw it, and I had to clean my pants when I was done. You find this amusing, Daniel? Okay.
A grown man
And there's
soiling himself.
yes, and there's 19 is 19 grown? I don't know.
Grownish.
And there's some scenes from the first Alien movie, I agree, which are just grippingly terrifying.
Yes.
When they're basically when they're hearing the distress signals coming in and they're listening and they can't make out like what exactly they're listening to, but like ugh.
Yep.
Ugh. All right, our self-indulgence
Yes.
must wind to a close.
Well, all right. So thanks again for Theresa Carpenter for being here with us. She and her husband and their lovely dog are on their way to their next duty station, and they were gracious and kind enough to go out of their way to make the stop here, to be here in person. And for that, we will be forever grateful.
You could see it that way. I see it as the whole PCS happened because she wanted to come here to the show, but we'll have to take that up with the Navy.
I thought we were done with the self-indulgence.
No, clearly not.
But again, thanks again. We hope you guys enjoyed it. You can check out our other episodes on all the various podcast platforms. Spotify.
So as far as podcasts, we're on all the major podcasts. 2 big ones: Spotify, Apple, a bunch of others,
Amazon.
YouTube. Yep. Audible.
We're
not going to list them off because we're going to forget some.
Good Pods. That's one apparently. But one of them we're also again on the
YouTube,
video
Rumble.
version, YouTube, Rumble, so that you can see the faces of these veterans and their pictures of their time in service. So
perfect. So we appreciate all y'all out there listening.
Yep.
Thanks for supporting us, and remember that your service matters.